Many people ask that question, what is righteousness? And so I want to remind you that you are asking a synaticist what righteousness is. Righteousness for me and for my community means that we observe the law and the gospel. That's what righteousness means for us. Let me demonstrate for you. Let's turn our attention over to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And I want to read verses 24 through 25 for you. And Yah commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear Yah, our Elohim, our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as we are this day. And it would be righteousness for us if we are careful to do all this commandment before Yah, our God, as he has commanded us. Merriam-Webster defines righteousness as one who acts in accord with divine or moral law. Did you hear that? Here's a secular definition from Merriam-Webster. Righteousness is one who acts in accord with divine or moral law. Divine or moral law. Let's turn our attention to the New Testament. I want to look at Romans chapter 2, and I'm going to read this in the New Living Translation for you. Pay very close attention to what we're about to read. This is what Paul says in the New Testament, and he is talking to a mixed demography, Jews and Gentiles, Greeks, Romans, and Israelites. This is applicable to everybody, so we have to listen. When the Gentiles sin, they will be destroyed, even though they never had God's written law. Let's pay attention. And the Jews who do have God's law will be judged by that law when they fail to obey it. For merely listening to the law doesn't make us right with God. So it doesn't matter what you know or what you heard. What matters is what you do with what you know and what you have heard. This is what Paul is saying to us. Let me read this again. For merely listening, verse 13, to the law doesn't make us right or righteous with God. It is obeying the law that makes us right in his sight. Verse 14, even Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively, when they intrinsically, when they innately obey it. We're talking about having a moral compass. That moral compass is often, it derives from some place. A lot of times we're introduced to it when we are children. Where did our parents get it from? So there are some components that are instinctive, and there are other areas of our being where we need to have something that is objective to develop our sense of right and wrongness, our righteousness. And we call it the law. This is what Paul is arguing. Notice, this is what he says in verse 14. Even Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. 15, they demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them they are doing right. So Paul is saying, look, the Gentiles who have not received the Torah, they are still going to be held accountable to what they have known to do instinctively. Hebrew Israelites have received the Torah, and if they fail to obey it, they're going to be judged by it. Either way, we have law that is in focus here. Either the written law, which helps develop our intrinsic sense of righteousness, or we have our intrinsic sense of righteousness that we are being expected to obey, unrefined by the Torah. Either way, there's a sense of rightness and wrongness that God has imputed into us or revealed to us that he is holding us accountable to. But this passage, what I'm about to read here for you, is very profound. So watch. Verse 26. And if the Gentiles obey God's law, most Christians say that we don't have to obey God's law. That was nailed to the cross. This isn't what Paul is saying. And they often turn to the Pauline epistles to make this argument, to make this claim. So let's go back and let's look at it. 26. And if the Gentiles obey God's law, won't Elohim declare them to be his own people? So part of becoming Yah's people, being proclaimed to be his, is being obedient to his commandments, his statutes, his ordinances, and his judgments. Look at this. 27. In fact, uncircumcised Gentiles who keep God's law will condemn you Jews who are circumcised and possess God's law, but do not obey it. So, righteousness, being under God's law, what is righteousness? I mean, look, you're asking a great question, but you're asking a synapsis. The entire Bible is about synapticism and the faith of the Messiah. What does that mean? It means going back to Mount Sinai. It means not adding anything to what the Most High revealed at Mount Sinai. It means not detracting anything from it. Paul said to the assembly at Corinth that we have been commanded not to go beyond that which is written. So you don't add anything to God's word. God's word is sufficient enough by itself. We have to learn to live within the confines of his word, within the confines of his truth. And we're able to do this, brothers and sisters. But it's going to require some soul searching. It's going to require some analysis and some critique of what you have been presently taught. The commandments of God require us to hold our community meeting on the seventh day because this was the day that he rested. This was the day that he set aside to cease from labor. Well, the commandment, God's will, is for us to observe that. He expects us to practice this. This is what he has conveyed in Isaiah chapter 56. The strangers who embrace his Sabbath and keep his covenant shall be invited to his house of prayer, for his house of prayer shall be called a house of prayer for all people. But there is a process that we have to embrace in order to become his people. Remember, this is what Paul says here. Paul said in verse 26, and if the Gentiles obey God's law, won't God declare them to be his own people? Well, again, this accords with what we're reading in the book of Isaiah. But how does one obtain that relationship with the Creator to be classified as his own people? Paul said, by obeying the legal instructions that are objective, that are divine, that comes from the Creator. We have a secular, intellectual, Merriam-Webster's dictionary that says, let me tell you what righteousness is. It's a set of protocols and ethics that come from a divine source. So, brothers and sisters, I'm asking you to pull back and just think about what you're practicing. Does it accord with the will of the Father? Thank you for the question. May the blessings of the Most High be upon you. Feel free to write to us again with more questions. We enjoy answering these questions. Enjoy the rest of your week. We will see you next time. Shalom.